Do you have a strong desire to become a fluent Spanish speaker, but you just have no idea how to reach this goal? Trust me, I know exactly how you feel because I was in the same spot a few years ago and I was completely lost and very frustrated. Although it is quite a challenging journey, it is very possible. And one thing that really helped me to start speaking Spanish fluently was not having a negative mentality. I can't speak Spanish at all. My Spanish sucks. I'm never going to become a fluent Spanish speaker. I sound like a gringo. No Spanish speaker can understand me. All these types of thoughts I have had in the past, and I would say they destroyed any progress that I could have made. By having this mentality, I was already admitting defeat, and it also stripped my desire to even practice speaking Spanish. And that is a big problem because my next tip is to speak Spanish every single day. And that's one thing that I did not want to do because I had all these thoughts going on in my head. Speaking Spanish every single day is important because just like with many other skills, speaking Spanish is a skill that needs to develop. So the more that you do it, you will definitely increase your speaking skills. And when I say speak Spanish, that does not mean that you are saying just a whole bunch of Spanish sentences, but that could just be you saying different words out loud. So you see the table in your home, so you say la mesa. Or you see your sister, so you say la hermana or una hermana. So it can be just as simple as that. It doesn't really matter, I would say, how much vocabulary that you do know. It could be day 0 or day 1 for you. But as long as you continue to practice speaking Spanish just a little bit every single day, you're going to see a lot of improvements. You should also focus on acquiring vocabulary if you want to speak Spanish fluently. I remember for me, vocabulary acquisition was just trying to understand what the definition of a Spanish word was. But now it means way more than that. Besides learning the definition of a Spanish word, you should also know how to use this word in context. So how you are going to use this in an actual sentence. Also, where are you going to place this particular Spanish word in a sentence as well? So that all has to do with sentence structure and learning Spanish grammar. Vocabulary acquisition is also about knowing how to pronounce this word correctly and knowing how it is spelled, and then also being able to hear it when a Spanish speaker is saying it. Now, speaking Spanish and also comprehending Spanish speakers is very difficult if you don't really know what the pronunciation rules are in the Spanish language. So that's why starting today, I highly recommend that you start learning these pronunciation rules. Por ejemplo, for example, A, E, I, O, U. The Spanish vowels. There are so many more little pronunciation rules that are really going to help you speak Spanish better, so when you are speaking, it doesn't sound just like a jarbled mess. Another example is la H. So la H is H in Spanish, and it is most of the time silent. So you're not going to say hola, but you're going to say hola, and that makes quite the difference. And this can be very confusing because the J in Spanish, or la jota, makes the H sound that you are more than likely familiar with in the English language. So for example, the word juice in Spanish is jugo, but it starts with a J and not an H. Since we are on the subject of pronunciation, maybe you are thinking to yourself, okay, if I want to speak Spanish fluently, I need to learn a specific dialect of Spanish, or I need to speak with a certain accent. And for this, I would say that is not necessary at all. This goes back to my tip about learning the pronunciation rules. So that's basically all you need to speak Spanish fluently. I wouldn't say it's necessary to have to learn all the colloquial words and phrases of a particular Spanish-speaking country to start speaking Spanish fluently. And the same thing with having an accent, because I never realized that actually trying to develop an accent was very difficult. But that's something that I had to learn the hard way because I wanted to have the Dominican accent, but I was trying to force an accent with my terrible pronunciation of Spanish words, so it just did not sound good at all. I don't recommend that you dedicate a lot of time every single day, and I mean hours upon hours, to studying just Spanish grammar, like out of this Spanish grammar book here, and expect that you're going to start speaking Spanish fluently. This was one of my biggest roadblocks in college and also after college because I thought that I could just study a lot of grammar for hours and learn every single detail of Spanish grammar and I would be speaking Spanish fluently, and that is not what happened whatsoever. Because it's one thing to have a lot of book knowledge, right? To have knowledge of Spanish grammar, but then it is another thing to actually use it. How do I use this or the grammar that I'm learning in this Spanish grammar book when I'm speaking actually? That's a completely different story. Start thinking in Spanish every single day. I love thinking in Spanish because for me, it's almost like a way that I can review what I have been learning in Spanish throughout the day. And I don't have to be at home. I don't have to be speaking Spanish, but I can just sit here and just start thinking. Wow, qué día excelente. La temperatura es perfecta y luego voy a juntarme con unos amigos. Also, thinking in Spanish is going to allow you to speak Spanish faster because before we speak, it all starts in our minds. So if you are constantly thinking of different words and different sentences before you actually start speaking, then you already have a good idea of what you're going to say, and then it's going to make it easier for you to say exactly what you are thinking. And of course, if you're just starting to think today, for example, it's going to be quite challenging, and maybe you can only think for a few minutes, or maybe you can only think of a few words before you get tired, because that is what happened to me. At first, when I started to think, I could only do it for a few minutes, but now I can think all day in Spanish without getting tired. So, of course, your mind has to get accustomed to thinking in this new language. Start immersing yourself in the Spanish language. Now, this is very helpful because it is a very natural way of learning the Spanish language, and is also really going to help you improve your pronunciation skills. It's going to increase your listening comprehension skills as well. One emotive approach that you have probably heard many times is living in a Spanish-speaking country, and I would say you should just take this approach off your list because you do not have to live in a Spanish-speaking country to become a fluent Spanish speaker. Another way that you can immerse yourself in the Spanish language is listening to music. Salsa, bachata, cumbia, banda. There are a variety of genres of Spanish music that you can listen to. And as you are singing along to these songs, you are going to sound less like a robot. And for me, that was my exact experience because I thought to myself, okay, singers, they control their voice. So they're always changing their flow, their rhythm, the pitch of their voice. Now I do the same thing when I'm speaking Spanish, so I don't sound so monotone. Listening to podcasts in Spanish is also a great way to immerse yourself. There are so many different types of podcasts, and that's what's really helpful because you get to listen to many different topics, which is really going to help you with your listening comprehension skills because you're learning vocabulary from different podcasts, and you're getting more accustomed to different accents and just different ways of how people speak in general in this language. Also, with podcasts, many of them are conversational, so that's really going to help you learn how to communicate in Spanish and how to have conversations with Spanish speakers. Read everything in Spanish. This is also a great way to immerse yourself in the Spanish language. So you're going to be reading the news in Spanish. You're going to be reading books in Spanish. Right now, I'm reading Fundación. And also you can be reading comments. So the comment sections of Instagram, of Facebook, of YouTube, and even TikTok, because you're going to be learning, I would say, more of informal ways of speaking Spanish. And I think that is a great way to learn how to start communicating in Spanish. And it's also going to help you become a fluent Spanish speaker because as a fluent Spanish speaker, you're not only going to be speaking formally, but also informally, let's say if you're speaking with some friends. Watch movies and TV shows. Now, this is very important because you get the visual. And I like having a visual of Spanish speakers having conversations because I get to see how they are actually moving their hands around, because I know certain hand gestures or facial expressions can mean different things in other countries. So that really helps out with learning the culture of a Spanish-speaking country. And again, it is a very natural way of increasing your pronunciation skills, your listening comprehension skills, and learning new vocabulary. All that is very important to speak Spanish fluently. I'll put some resources in the description box of this video so you can start exploring some Spanish books, podcasts, and TV shows that you can consume. Have conversations with Spanish speakers. This is what it's all about. You're going to learn a ton from actually having these conversations because it's a lot different than just having a conversation with yourself when you're at home in Spanish, for example. But you have to listen to that Spanish speaker. You have to understand what they're saying, number one, and then you also have to respond to them. You have to think about what you want to say, you have to respond to them, and then you have to continue that conversation. Now, this type of experience is, number one, very rewarding. It is very fun. It is also a challenge, especially if you have never learned another language besides your native language. I love all the conversations that I've had in Spanish because I have improved my speaking skills a lot, because usually when I'm having conversations with someone, I always ask them a ton of questions like, oh, how do you say this? Or what did you just say? And then am I saying it correctly? So that's why I love having conversations, because you can have that type of interaction. You can ask a lot of questions and you just learn so much about that other person. I learned how to express myself in Spanish. It's just, there are so many benefits. And again, you don't have to physically be in a Spanish speaking country to actually have conversations with Spanish speakers. So maybe you can find some Spanish speakers in the city that you are living in, or thanks to technology, we have the ability to have conversations with Spanish speakers using language exchange applications. Another big tip that I have for you that you should keep in mind every single day is to be very patient. If you lose your patience, this is a very easy way to get very frustrated. And once you get frustrated, you don't really want to do anything, right? Enjoy the process, have fun, and go at your own pace. Make learning Spanish a part of your life. Now, when I say this basically means that every aspect of your life is somehow involved with the Spanish language. So we are not just studying for, let's say, 20 minutes and 30 minutes every single day, the Spanish language, and then that's it. Throughout the day, we don't do anything else. But no, every little aspect of my life is about Spanish. So I'm thinking in Spanish throughout the day. I'm speaking in Spanish throughout the day as much as possible. If I'm on the way to work, I'm listening to the radio in Spanish. I'm listening to music in Spanish or a podcast in Spanish. If I'm using an ATM, I'm going to put it in Spanish. If I go to a place where there are Spanish speakers, let's say like at a store or a restaurant, I'm going to be speaking Spanish. I'm going to be using this language basically as if it was my native language. That is exactly what I mean. I always try to almost imagine if I did not know English, then everything that I would be consuming would be in Spanish. And again, I would be having conversations with Spanish speakers consistently, whether that's my friends or just people that I meet again at a store or just on the bus or something like that. Doing all these things will really help you become a fluent Spanish speaker. I would say a lot faster than if you weren't doing this, if you weren't making Spanish a part of your life. This will make it really easy to develop that amazing habit of consistency, which all of us Spanish learners really need. It's also going to make it easier to be disciplined. For example, right now, I don't have to force myself to learn Spanish or, to pick up my Spanish book and start reading it or to listen to Spanish music because, again, this is my life. Everything in my life is all about Spanish. So now it's not about discipline, but it's something that is very normal. This is what I do. I always talk to Spanish speakers. I always listen to music in Spanish. I'm always speaking the Spanish to myself. This is a very normal thing to do. And this is a place that I really want you to be at as well. And again, if this is your first day of learning Spanish, you can start doing this today. But again, of course, you're not going to be able to understand everything or everyone or have complete sentences and, speak fluently. But these are the beginning steps to reach this goal. I hope these tips really motivate you and inspire you to reach your goal of speaking Spanish fluently, because it is very possible. Now watch this video to learn how I became a fluent Spanish speaker.